genes control your biological destiny, or are they just clues of what can happen if you don't take any action? If you recall back in episode number 171, I interviewed Dr. Tyler Pansner about why your genes are so important and how to get the most out of them. But that's only one part of the picture. The other side is your lifestyle, everything that sits above your genome, aka what's called epigenetics. In today's episode, I sit down with Hannah Wendt from True Diagnostic to discuss the world of epigenetics and the impact of trauma, stress, diet, exercise, routines, and so much more on your biological age. Because it's not just about the number of times you're blowing out birthday candles, but the quality of each of those years. Unlike genetics, your epigenetics change rapidly in response to lifestyle. So you can get a report card on how you're living and whether or not you're contributing to premature aging and hopefully not mortality. Today, we also go into some of the lesser discussed biohacks and longevity protocols, such as plasma exchange, low dose lithium, the impact of traumas, biological stressors, socioeconomic conditions, and how epigenetic methylation testing fits into your overall diagnostic plan. I ask Hannah how she stack ranks things like annual blood labs and daily wearables and genetic testing and a whole lot more. So, who is Hannah? Hannah Wendt is a biology graduate from the University of Kentucky with a passion for longevity and disruptive technologies. She has a background in cell signaling research and served as Director of Research and Content for the International Peptide Society. In 2020, she founded True Diagnostic, a company specializing in methylation based diagnostics for life extension and preventative healthcare, a personal favorite topic of mine. True Diagnostic conducts extensive research with over 30 clinical trials and one of the world's largest private epigenetic health databases, testing over 35,000 patients. Hannah also created Everything Epigenetics, a platform to discuss how lifestyle factors and DNA expression impact overall health. If you like this subject, you can go back and listen to the previous ones I've recorded with their co founder of True Diagnostic, Ryan Smith, episode number 82 and 47. You can grab a test for yourself on their website at truediagnostic.com and use the code URBAN to save either 12 or 15%. From my extensive research into this world and consulting with a lot of the world's leading experts, this is what I believe to be by far and away the most accurate and actionable epigenetic methylation test, or really biological age test, on the market. It's what I use, and it's what a lot of the top wellness influencers also use. The Brian Johnsons of the world who are spending $2 million per year on their wellness routine, and it's what powers the Rejuvenation Olympics. So if you're interested in biological age testing, this is the company for you. You can find the show notes for everything we discuss, including the resources and discounts and all of that, on the website show notes, which will be at mindbodypeak.com/184. All right. Without further ado, let's bring in Hannah. Hannah, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Nick. I'm happy to be here.
I'm looking forward to this conversation because I've talked a bit about biological aging on the podcast previously with your, I believe, co-founder, Ryan Smith. We recorded 2 episodes way back when I had first discovered you guys and was learning about this whole field. And I think things have evolved a lot since then.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to dive into it maybe from a different lens or a little bit deeper as well. Update the audience, tell them what's new and what we should really be focusing on now.
Perfect. Before we get started, what are the unusual non-negotiables you've done so far today for your health, your performance, and your bioharmony?
I actually did not follow my normal routine this morning. I'll be honest. I had a cousin stay with me out of town and we were up a little bit later. So didn't hit the gym, didn't do my meditation as normal, but I did make sure I was getting a lot of steps on my stand up desk or my walking desk. So that's usually a non negotiable along with meditation and working out. But I obviously skipped those two this morning. Again, if I'm being completely honest, I probably have, I don't know, somewhere close to like 10 to 12,000 steps already for today. So I always try to aim for more if I know I'm not lifting weights or doing any other type of activity later on in the day too. And water, lots of water. I already had my water and my electrolytes today.
You have me beat. I'm at 9,665 steps currently so far today. So good on you. For people who don't know who you are, how would you summarize what you do?
Ooh, who I am and what I do. Well, I think who I am and what I do are two separate questions, but you asked what I do. So I think it's really interesting to talk about what people do daily, right? You have maybe these titles like co-founder, director of clinical testing. It's like, what do you actually do? What does that really mean? And I really spend my day to day speaking with healthcare providers or our larger partners who are offering the True Diagnostic products, specifically focusing on our biological age flagship product called True Age. So it can really range from onboarding healthcare providers and introducing them to the subject of why we're measuring biological age and how we measure it through those epigenetic modifications to reviewing results with someone and how to really help them understand how this is super important and very clinically actionable. And there's some other conversations to be had too in terms of how they can use this as a recurring revenue model or monetize this type of testing in their practice, all the way to talking about fun studies and research opportunities as well. So that's usually what I'm doing on a day to day. And podcasts like these, sometimes with a lot of people, I really enjoy the podcast as well.
Well, you do everything epigenetics, which is also, I believe, the name of your platform. So will you break down for people who didn't tune into the first episodes with Ryan Smith, what exactly is epigenetics and how does it relate to genetics?
Yeah, definitely. And you're right. I have everything Epigenetics, which is my separate company. Really, it's an educational platform. So I host a bi-weekly, so every other week podcast that's mostly with healthcare providers on what is epigenetics, what does it mean more in the research realm, right? I was already having those conversations anyway, so I was like, I'll just publish them too. It's fine. I have a little website and whatnot. So that's a really fun thing I do on the side. But in terms of epigenetics and what this actually means, epi is just a Greek prefix. It means above or on top of. So we're quite literally looking on top of your genetic infrastructure. And your follow up to that, Nick, was, well, how's it different to your genetics? Your genetics are your like pure DNA code, right? Your single nucleotide polymorphisms, meaning these are your building blocks of your body. Think of it as almost your base layer. It's your hardware. It's not going to change. It makes up about 20% of your entire phenotypic outcomes. However, your epigenetics actually express those genetic modifications. And one example I always like to use in this case is I have a genetic predisposition for Alzheimer's. So it runs in my family. My grandmother passed away from it. I have that particular SNP, the APOE34, meaning I'm more likely to get it at a younger age and more likely to die from Alzheimer's as well. That's like really disheartening, right? Like I should be upset and sad about that, which I am to an extent, but I can't do anything about it, right? But from an epigenetic standpoint, there are actually things I could do to reduce that risk further. Meaning, I can take estrogen supplementation. I can work on even lifestyle factors, small things that make a really, really huge difference in that expression of the APO34 variant. So epigenetics is really 80% of all of your health outcomes. They're changeable, they're modifiable as well. It's the software of your genetics or of that hardware.
And so you said that genetics makes up about 20% of the outcomes, phenotypic outcomes, and epigenetics is the 80%. Because I see two different camps in this world. Some people are like, okay, it's pretty much all genetics, and the other camp is it's pretty much all epigenetics. And it seems like the truth lies somewhere in between. So how do you determine if what you're working on can be solved via epigenetics, your goal, your outcome, whatever it is, or it's a genetic something that is better left? I mean, you don't have as much ability to influence.
Yeah, this is a good question. I think we would be super, super naive to say, hey, we just need to look at our genes. They're responsible for most of the things in our lives, our health outcomes. The reason I say that is because we have data behind it. And that data is going to be the Human Genome Project that failed us quite traumatically a while back. So the Human Genome Project is where scientists set out. They wanted to really measure the first human genome. They got thousands and thousands of samples. They really, really thought, and I mean, a lot of people thought, probably myself included, if I was old enough at the time to really sit and think through this logically. If we understand the human genome, then we'll be able to solve for cancer, for Alzheimer's, for cardiovascular disease, for all of these different type of outcomes. And it left people super, super frustrated. So if you even Google anything about like the Human Genome Project, the first thing that comes up is like scientists are angry, right? And we didn't really even solve anything. We barely cracked the surface, right? Those types of headlines. So, I said 80% are really your epigenetics, 20% are your genetics. I am definitely generalizing there. It's going to be specific to that particular like location, right? So the APO34, for example, is a really, really well studied gene. That gene may make up 80% of my health outcomes for Alzheimer's. And maybe from an epigenetic standpoint, I can only control like 20% of it, right? But we just don't know. There has to be a lot more research into each specific individual gene, which would take a lot of time. But we just also know how important environment is, right? Where you can have, and you see this all the time, twins, right? As an example or as a study, you have one twin who lives in, New York City. They're a smoker, they're a drinker, they stay out late, big partier. And you have the same twin living in like upstate New York in the Hamptons, like doesn't smoke, doesn't party, doesn't drink. And they would look vastly different and have very, very different health outcomes too. Their genetics is the same, right? That's not describing any of it. Their epigenetics are really what's going to be pushing their health outcomes.
I think that's also not very surprising. If like you tell someone that, okay, if you live a healthy lifestyle, you're going to do better. It's pretty intuitive. But it's interesting to see the twin studies affirming the same thing.
Yes, absolutely. It's super interesting, and again, something we're learning a lot more about. There are a lot of twin kind of cohorts or directories. Stanford has a really good one. That's where we just did one of our last publications, which was the twin study. It was looking at vegan versus omnivore diets in twins as well. And again, knowing they're genetically the same, one twin went on the omnivore diet, one twin went on the vegan diet. What is the outcome? As it's looking at different blood-based values, some of the biological age clocks, what makes up those biological age clocks and kind of which trends we're seeing too.
Yeah, I mean, one of the issues I see with research is that it's looking at a higher level topic, such as the foods that you choose to include and maybe the ones you choose to avoid, whether you're an omnivore, a vegan, a carnivore, whatever it is. But then a lot of times it's not incorporating the other factors, such as like when you're eating or the way you're eating. Like, are you eating high protein every day, or are you cycling between high protein one day, low protein the next day? Same thing with carbohydrates and fats and all those. There's so many other variables that it's really hard to control for everything in research.
Yes, yeah, definitely. That study, again, it was a really great study. It was included in the documentary series "You Are What You Eat" on Netflix. So it got a lot of press. And the study really wasn't to say, hey, does vegan diet or omnivore diet slow aging? Although the press definitely extrapolated that and, twisted it, turned it, extrapolated all of these things. It was, really just a discovery kind of type of study to start to get a little bit of data back, which is what the field needs, right? We definitely need a baseline for a lot of these randomized controlled clinical trials, which it was not a randomized controlled clinical trial, but we need more of those. We need them in small scale, right? We need them to be affordable. And then what we can do is actually measure or follow up that same group 5-10 years later down the line and see how they're still performing today. So we still need to set up that infrastructure for those like maybe less powered baseline studies first.
I'm curious about your overall hierarchy of diagnostics and testing, because it seems to me that it's really important to know your genetics, even if it doesn't drive the majority of outcomes, because that's not going to be changing throughout your lifetime. You test it once, and although our knowledge around the different SNPs and all that changes, like we get more and we realize that, okay, this one is weighted higher, this one's less important. But then also, like, before you layer on epigenetic stuff, it makes sense to have that baseline. Where do you put the different tests for overall health and wellness?
Oh, good question. They're all so important. I mean, I'm obviously super biased. I like have to say I'm going to say epigenetics, but no, I truly do think it's still epigenetics. So, but again, knowing your genetics is great. It gives you a framework, I think, for how you probably should live your life. I'm actually getting my genetics done. I've had my 23andMe done historically. I don't even like remember my login. I don't have access to my account anymore. I have my raw data downloaded somewhere. But I'm actually getting my genetics retested and should have the results. I haven't even done the test yet. I haven't received it in the mail, but should probably have the results back, I would say, in like 2 to 3 weeks or so with a pretty in depth panel I'm doing. So I'm really, really excited to see how that comes back because I want to make some changes. So, for example, I remember when I tested my genetics previously, I could really go crazy with healthy saturated fats. I mean, they told me the coach that was interpreting it was telling me I could pour like olive oil on an avocado and just eat that like daily, which I would probably do. Like I love olive oil, I love avocados. Um, I could also have a lot of coffee throughout the day, so I'm able to metabolize caffeine really, really well. Caffeine can still make me feel a little bit like jittery. I love coffee, so I really only stick to like 1 cup a day. That's it. But so I'm giving you these specific examples because you can start to see how they're almost like what you should base your life on, right? Some people have like predispositions that make their body negatively react to gluten, for example. So maybe you want to cut out gluten in your diet as well. So I'm really using this as a baseline to say, okay, what should I probably eat or start to use as guidelines, right? How could I optimize my DNA from like a cellular level? Is there anything else I need to know from nutrition based standpoint, physical fitness standpoint, oxidative stress, maybe mitochondrial based health as well, even I said nutrition, fitness, yeah, sleep, stress. Yeah, I mentioned too. So those are kind of the main 4 categories I go by. I know I have the one particular gene too that where I don't know that I'm hungry, right? Like I'll overeat.
Hmm.
Satiety.
Satiety.
I'm
Yeah,
saying
sure.
that incorrectly. Um, but essentially, yeah, right. Like I'm prone to like overeating. So again, drinking water before your meal, like taking a break after you've eaten, and kind of understanding how like full you are and what that actually feels like. So I would say genetics is still pretty important, but again, it's not going to change. Like my genetic levels are the way it is. So in terms of clinical utility, it's
Why
pretty
are you,
limited.
if it doesn't change, why are you retesting then?
I don't remember my results. I don't have my raw data file. I don't know where it is. Like, yeah, I lost it. I don't know where it is. So I'm just retesting. But great question, right? You shouldn't have to retest if you remember to be organized and keep all your files and stuff, which I haven't done.
Yeah, well, I'd be really interested to see if your results would change at all. I would hope they wouldn't. I'd assume they wouldn't, but that could be a red flag if you upload a result a couple years later and you see big differences.
Oh yeah. No. So two different companies too. So the 23andMe has a different interpretation. And then I'm doing it with another company called Wild Health. And they focus on genomics, personalized medicine. So again, from a genomic testing standpoint, like 98% of companies who do genomic testing, they're all looking at the same positions, right? What's going to be different is the interpretation to an extent. Not different in terms of telling you two different things, but maybe saying the same thing in a little bit of a different way, so to speak.
Okay. So you have genetics, there's that. You also have epigenetics. Where would you put something like blood labs?
Blood labs probably first. Yeah, I think blood labs would probably fall first. So getting my bloods redone next week. I'm going to do it on Tuesday. I usually do that every 6 to 12 months as well. But again, those are just the gold standard, right? In terms of biomarkers, which are super predictive of health outcomes. However, I think unless you're very well trained and versed in new kind of functional medicine and reading blood-based biomarkers, I wouldn't trust a GP to just interpret those markers, right? So I have a longevity healthcare provider who, reads the latest, greatest research on these lab values and understands exactly what they mean. I have even my like requisition form like right here. So this and proves I'm going to go to lab for and, get it all done. So again, uric acid, HbA1c, vitamin B12, folate, ferritin hormones, some other B vitamins, IGF-1, CBC, um, the lipoprotein little a is super important now, right? And I actually don't think that was a concern because that can be out of range when you have that risk for Alzheimer's too, actually, I believe. So that was one of the concerns. And I don't think I've ever actually gotten that measured before. So lab values, super important.
Yeah, it's hard to stack rank everything because like you could be having slightly out of balance, say, LDL or something like that because you have a genetic predisposition towards it, and it means you'll need a little more care in that department, and you might be what the general lab markers show as normal when it's actually slightly out of optimal. And if you don't know that going in, maybe you'll notice it after years of continuously testing and refining and tweaking your diet, but maybe not. And it's helpful. I like genetics. You can see the areas. Okay, like I need a little more focus here, a little less focus here, so you can allocate your resources accordingly.
Yeah. Yes. You're exactly right. So again, you can use them together, right? You can start to kind of paint that picture of your health. And I think genetics is important because it also shows you your family predispositions, right? Like what to look out for, what to like be a little bit more weary about. But again, also you can't use it as an excuse, right? Because your epigenetics are going to be the controlled part. So I would say if I had to rank the order top to bottom, it would be the blood-based values, as long as you are getting the correct things tested and as long as you're having someone interpret those for you and you know those optimal ranges and the most up-to-date research. Secondarily, again, would be the epigenetics because aging is the number one risk factor for all-cause mortality, morbidity. So if you have that increased age, there are really, really easy, simple things you can do right away to start to bring that down. And you're going to bring that down by optimizing lab values. And then thirdly, understanding your genetic predispositions and optimizing those as well. So when we say we're taking action for the genetic predispositions we have, essentially we're working on our epigenome, right? The expression levels of those genes, what we do have control in.
One thing I don't like about blood labs is they are definitely just a snapshot in time. If I have one bad night of sleep before I go in, I'm thinking about what my blood results are going to be. I don't sleep as well. I get like an hour or two less sleep than usual. I could go in and see drastically different results than I live 95% of the time just because of that one day. And there's certain lab markers that are more resistant to that because they're long-term averages, but a lot of them are more volatile and they fluctuate tremendously. And then there's also like the different like hormones in the body and stuff like that, unless you're doing a Dutch test or something that accounts for that variation. Like even the time of day you go into the lab, whether it's 9 a.m. or 11 a.m. or 2 p.m., that can give you very different results. So I'm also curious how often people get a false sense of doom from their lab markers.
It's a valid concern. Last time I did my labs, I did the Dutch test. I'll probably never do that again because it was awful peeing on those cards and like all the things you could have need that actually affects those results. I'm like, what am I doing? If I'm very detail oriented, I feel like I pay attention to instructions. Like it was even hard for me to follow. I couldn't imagine the person who just like doesn't read instructions very well and like follow things along. And just an interesting test overall. But again, I had some good, findings from it. Your DHEAs, your cortisol levels, a more in-depth panel of your hormones. I'm going to be doing my labs Tuesday morning, 8 a.m., right when they open, fasted, of course. I will not be working out the day before. I will not be working out the day of. So I'm really trying to balance everything. Weirdly enough, I've always been like such a good sleeper. It's the one thing I brag about. I used to have a Whoop and I used to track it, but I even knew I was such a great sleeper before like tracking it. So sleep has never been like an issue for me. I think the issue again comes back to the core root of these lab markers, right? And True Diagnostic, we're a CLIA certified lab, meaning we follow all the rules, regulations as it relates to like laboratory processing and standardization. Same with LabCorp and Quest, they're CLIA certified labs as well. CLIA certified labs legally can have up to a 20% variance within the metrics they are reporting. We don't have that for our biological HS. We publish on this, that the precision values. But that is crazy. That is then so insane to say. And actually, it's really funny because if you work with our like top healthcare providers in like New York City, Miami, LA, people who are seeing like celebrities, they'll actually take It's hard to control for time of day, but you want to be at least consistent when you're like actually giving the labs. They'll actually take a lot of blood from the patient. They'll aliquot it into like, they'll do 3 of the same draws for LabCorp and then 3 of the same draws for like Quest and do like averages of that. I know, isn't that crazy? Obviously, like, can't do that, right? But I think what's most important to follow, if you are someone like myself or like average consumer who can only do these tests like once, is seeing where your trend is going, right? Um, the before and the after, and that's important with like your epigenetic test too. That's though why epigenetics is such a good biomarker, Nick, is because it's more of a running average of the 3 to 6 past months because of it's so stable, but it's also able to be changeable too. So like our DNA methylation CRP is way better. It's more reliable. The epigenetic CRP compared to your traditional CRP testing, which may, go up and down. It's going to vary from like stress, if you're drinking coffee, things like that. And I know they say, you know, really you can still drink black coffee, that won't break your fast, but I'm just doing water. And then I'll like go get myself a bagel or treat myself to breakfast somewhere.
Yes. Okay. So we've established now that blood labs can be misleading if you're not getting it done thoroughly and regularly and you're not seeing the long-term trend. Because if you get 20% underreporting one time and then 20% overreporting the next time, it can look like there's a real issue when there might not, and it's just the nature of the lab processing and everything. And I've heard plenty of stories where people send their results into different labs and they get the same sample, very different results from that. So there's also then, of course, the things that people are probably already doing who are listening in, such as wearables. Are you a fan of incorporating those somewhere into the diagnostic routine?
Not really. That's just me. That's my personal opinion. Who knows? It probably doesn't mean much. I had a Whoop. I was gifted it through a group who, had a WhatsApp around it, would set out and do like challenges and things. I love that group. They're called Offscotch. If you haven't heard of them, check them out. They are basically a group of people, of like-minded people, like entrepreneurs, people who really want to focus on their health and the optimization there. And they do that through like Whoop as one of their offerings. And it's really fun to start to like compare scores and again, motivate each other and create this community around the wearable. That I really loved. I really loved that community. What I didn't love is I felt like I was just so obsessed with it, like so obsessed with tracking it, like wanting to look at it, like understanding where I was, which again, I think is good to an extent, but I'm just the type of person that was like, oh, I just, worked my butt off in the gym doing all this weightlifting and like I forget what the score is called, the fitness score, whatever it is for the day is at like 2. And I'm like, so I feel like I had to like sprint on the treadmill to get that score to go up. And I was also lazy. I didn't input like my weights into the app or anything. Like when I go to the gym, I don't want to be on my phone. I don't look at my phone. I think it's important to, get in, get out, be focused on like what you want to achieve and also to optimize your time in that way. Really interesting insights for sleep. Recovery was like super insightful too. So what I thought was really cool and probably my favorite part of the wearable, although I don't use them anymore, was it could like tell when I was going to get sick, right? Or like when I was traveling. Like I would look at it, I would still feel okay, maybe like a little bit under the weather. And then like my recovery score would be so low. And yeah, it was just like amazing. The next day, then I would be so sick and I'd be able to like let off the gas a little bit and really relax because I do feel like I'm, such a high functioning individual. And my HRV sucks. So I also learned that it's just like pretty consistently low. So it did help me maybe push with like meditation, some stress reduction techniques and breathing techniques and stuff as well. But I've just never been a like consistent user of the wearable. Don't have an Apple Watch. Have never tried the Aura Ring. I would be curious to try an Aura Ring. I think my excuse has been that again, I can't like lift weights with it really. I know it does a really good job at syncing to your cycle for women. So I've heard really good results for that. I think that'd be really, really interesting. How it's taking your temperature again across time, not necessarily a point in time. So it can help there.
I want to go back to the field of epigenetics now and how this factors into the broader landscape of biological age, because I've heard commentary that epigenetics is only one of the hallmarks of aging. It's probably not as important as some people are saying it. These are all things I've heard. And that like a true biological age measurement should incorporate a bunch of things in addition to just epigenetics.
Yeah, that's a great point. I love that you brought up that question. So, why is epigenetics different from other biological age clocks? In terms of its popularity, right? You see all of these biological age companies popping up, and usually they're doing it through some type of epigenetic measurement. Well, the point of biological age clocks are really to predict the future, right? It's just a biomarker, like we've been talking about, whether it's like HRB, whether it's your HbA1c, your cholesterol markers. The point of a biomarker, though, is to predict the future, right? So the question we should ask ourselves is, how predictive is a biomarker of XYZ disease, or like death in this case, because the biological age clocks are really good at prediction of even death itself. And when you compare actually True Diagnostics biological age clocks to any that are currently out there and available, or to any other like biological age tests, like grip strength test, gait speed test, glycan age, telomere length test, all of the above, it is the most predictive. And that's actually measured by hazard ratios. So basically saying, again, if you look at your epigenetics with the most accuracy, certainty, reliability, we're able to predict disease just better. Now, why epigenetics though? Like why does it do so much better? Well, it actually incorporates other factors of aging in how the algorithms are actually trained. So Nick, for example, our omic MAGE we created with Harvard about a year ago doesn't just look at epigenetics. It reports out through the lens of epigenetics, using epigenetics as a surrogate per se. But in the training, we actually measured clinical lab values. We measured a lot of metabolites. We measured a lot of proteins. And then we're just using all of that information together with the DNA methylation or epigenetics, and then regressing them against the epigenetics to report out the biological age. So, that's what we call a second generation epigenetic biological age clock. A first generation would be just if you were using epigenetics, right, in chronological age. And those were like, yes, of course, they're not great. They're only looking at one thing, right? We need to better power these clocks with other underlying biological information or reasons as to why we're aging. Because to your point, aging is so complicated, right? We had 9 hallmarks of aging. Now we have like 12 or 13. There's articles all the time saying, the microbiome should be a function of hallmark of aging, right? So there's really no agreement on that. I think it's depends who you ask, right?
That makes sense. And so that's one of your newer clocks, and it's cool. I didn't realize that it's incorporating other endpoints from the samples. But like when I submit my first sample to you guys over 2 years ago, I didn't this technology wasn't around yet. So how are you able to run it through your new algorithm to get these scores?
Oh, it's a project. People don't know like the behind the scenes, but it was such a project. It's something we started when we first opened. And we really had the idea behind True Diagnostic at the end of 2019. We ran our first sample in July of 2020, but we weren't satisfied with what was out there. We knew these had to be better. So since we opened, our goal was to make the best biological age clock that was ever created to date. And, there are some models out there that we followed and then basically kind of superpower them, right, with even more data and information. But we're able to update your results. For example, you took the test a long time ago. This wasn't available when you first took the test because we have just that raw data file, right? So essentially, we don't have to measure you again. We just run that raw data file through our new interpretation or algorithms. Now, your sample from 2 years ago is going to be outdated, right? So we want to definitely get you a new kit, send you one. We'll have to do that. That way you can retest and see. It's a little bit hard, right, when you're not doing it consistently. I love what you said about the wearable. Like, hey, once you know your body, you don't have to wear it. You don't have to do it as much. Same with the epigenetics. Like if you're really wanting to optimize lifespan, health span, your aging, probably going to take the test every 3 to 4 months even to make sure you're going and you're heading in the right direction. Once you start to stabilize, every 6 months, I think, is great for maintenance. If like this is one of your main goals in life is to increase lifespan and health span, every 6 months would probably be preferable. But if you really were like, okay, I feel like I understand my body, I don't want to test interventions anymore. Like I really like my lifestyle and what I'm doing, and I'm holding myself accountable in that way, then once a year, I think, is totally acceptable.
And I don't think I've told you this, but I actually have like 5 different biological age test kits here. And later, after I'm no longer recovering from a little back injury, I plan on running them all at the same time to see how the different results compare and contrast. And I was going to do the current one, this current round sooner before this interview, but I, as I mentioned, hurt my back. And I'm wondering how like life occurrences, whether it's hurting your back or getting sick or major life stressors, how those would impact your results. I'm imagining pretty dramatically.
Did you get surgery or anything like that on your back? Okay,
No
no.
surgery.
Okay, good, good. Well, that's good first and foremost. But the reason I ask is because I'll come to the point I'm trying to make here soon. But essentially, it does make a difference, right? These different stressors that you have in your body. And there was a paper that came out outside of Harvard by Dr. Jesse Poganik out of Dr. Vadim Gladishev's lab, which is like one of the world's top leading aging labs. And they looked at different stressors. Now, they were pretty extreme stressors. They were severe COVID-19. They were elective and unelected surgeries, which is why I asked, and then also pregnancy as well. So what they did is they essentially looked at the biological age clocks and they asked the question, how do these stressors affect them? And what they saw is extreme increases upon that stressor. What was to follow, though, was really, really impressive, which again, depending on the stressor, it could be 2, 3, 6 months. You actually saw the reversal of those biological age clocks back to baseline or even better, too. Yeah. So the effects are transient, which is positive, right? Our body has a healing mechanism. Also, like a little bit of acute stress, it's great. It means you have a purpose. It means you like care about something. But it's more of that like chronic stress over time that's really going to start to wear and tear on the body and affect the biological ages. So yeah, depending on how long you've been out or again, the intensity of the injury, that would determine how long you would want to wait.
Okay. Yeah. And if someone gets sick too, how long do you recommend waiting? Like if you had a perfect protocol, how would you make sure that people are using this test most effectively?
I'd probably say 3 months is super safe unless there's like a catastrophic based event. You can look in that paper. I'll send it to you afterwards if you want to link it, but it's just called Biological Ages Increased Upon Stress and Restored Upon Recovery is the name, but I can send it to you. That way people can look at those exact timelines. But yeah, pregnancy, like if you're breastfeeding, you probably want to wait a lot longer, right? So there are just a lot of factors involved. But I would say, if you have a mild like cold, flu, a little type of sickness, 3 months is probably plenty.
I asked because for my last test, I was sick. I want to say the week before I had it done, and I definitely saw the results on my blood biomarkers because I also did labs at the same time. And then also I'm thinking that I see them reflected on the True Diagnostic reports I have that we'll discuss in a minute. Before we get into that, I'd love to know what you do based on this data you get back to personalize your own health and wellness routine.
Oh, a lot, actually. And again, this is what makes it so fun now with the improvements we've made in our recent biological age clocks. So now we can tell you the why or the how you're aging, right? So within that omic image, we have these outcomes called epigenetic biomarker proxies or EBPs, where again, we can actually report out clinical lab values, metabolites, or proteins through the lens of DNA methylation and epigenetics. So interestingly enough, the EBPs that come back a little bit higher for me are out of range, I should say, higher or lower, depending on which EBP it is and what direction you want it to go, were more related to like insulin sensitivity, which is super, super interesting. Like I don't have a family history of, type 2 diabetes. My grandpa, who is like extremely healthy, golfs every day, is 84. He does eat sweets, like doesn't pay too much attention to his diet. He's like edging the pre-diabetic line now. Like that's the only kind of family connection I have there. So I'm thinking I'm getting like a little bit of insulin sensitivity or a little bit insulin resistant based issues. So I haven't done it yet. I'm waiting for my blood lab to come back and to look at them just to like, also see how they're doing. But I want to do a CGM, like a continuous glucose monitor, as well. So I'll probably do that because again, I'm waiting on my labs because I'm just curious. But again, even if your labs say they're okay, your epigenetics could still be out of range because they're detecting an earlier signal, right? So I'm really interested. I want to do a CGM, definitely. We also even dive into individual systems too. So, like my symphony age report, my hormone age is super high, and that's powered by IGF-1s and DHEAs. So, I'm really interested and curious to look and dive a little bit deeper into my hormone based panel that I'm going to get on my lab results as well. The Dunedin pace. So Dunedin pace, my pace of aging score, I always like to keep it below 1, of course. And I do a pretty good job at actually restricting calories. Like that's usually a non-negotiable I do every day as well. Is just naturally like restricting about 10% of my caloric intake level. And that can help move that Dunedin pace lower. The Dunedin pace, again, in all of these markers I'm talking about are extremely predictive of disease states and death itself if they're elevated. So again, really just it's a way to put something on paper that's tangible and say, I have to make a difference, or this is where I'm heading, right? Because these markers are predicting the future, as I've echoed, and as we've talked about. So those are the main aging ones. I mean, we even go over your immune cell subset system, where we may say you're deficient in like vitamin D, zinc, and you need to boost your immune cell system. We have a really cool physical fitness age where it gives you information on your VO2 max, your FEV1, grip strength, and gait speed. So we can actually tell you, hey, you look a little poor in your aerobic based exercises, which is where most people fall short because no one wants to do aerobic based exercises. No one wants to jog or, swim or cycle, right? Be at that like higher intensity level for a longer period of time. So that's quite funny when people get those results back. Again, it measures your behavior or patient's behavior, makes you take a look inward and reflect on that.
Oh, cool. I know from previous research that a lot of the older clocks, perhaps some of the other new ones too, actually used your calendar chronological age as one of the variables when they were training the model and running the calculations. And to me, that doesn't make any sense because it's like defeating the whole purpose of running that. You can't use the same variable for both the dependent and independent variable.
That's a great point. I think, the first generation clocks where you're describing were still really great when they came out. They were a huge discovery. Like I wasn't at that conference when you basically saw, hey, DNA methylation, epigenetics can predict chronological age. Our correlation value of above 0.99, people said like their jaw dropped to the floor. You just don't see those correlations in science. So obviously there was something very, very special there. And even those first generation clocks are better at predicting all cause mortality and morbidity than your chronological agents standalone. But they act weird. And by weird, I mean they increase with things like caloric restriction, they increase with things like senolytic therapy. Again, they're not as reliable. They can have up to a 30% variance, meaning you can have up to an 18-year delta in either direction when you take the same sample and run, the same algorithm on that sample. So there are a lot of limitations within those, which again is why there is a need for the research and development, the improvements within the clocks, within the second generations, such as our Omic MH, the Symphony Age, and then you have your Generation 3, which is the Dunedin pace.
I'm curious what outcomes, what therapies, interventions are you seeing that have the best overall effect on True Diagnostic members? Like, are you seeing anything in particular, especially anything that's counterintuitive? Like, of course, if you're sleeping better, you're reducing stress, you're moving more, those are all going to help. But like, what are you seeing that's really moving the needle and or surprising?
On the date we're recording this, we'll have a paper published with Yale, actually, looking at over 75 clinical interventional trials, 20 of them, about 20, 25 of them coming directly from True Diagnostic, and looking at all the epigenetic clocks on those clinical trials and looking at what looks the best, what's moving the needle, what's not. And interestingly enough, our algorithms are really, really great at, without saying too much, are really, really great at capturing lifestyle and pharmacological treatment changes. Supplements, we're not seeing them be super statistically significant. And one of the big takeaways of that paper too, which again makes sense. I don't think will be too surprising for anyone. the worse off you are, right? The worse your health is, like the more you're going to be able to make a change with that biological age too, right? That's where the supplements come in. That's where everything comes in. But I think as a society, we just want the quick fix, right? We want the one pill, the one size fits all. We want the GLP-1 to lose weight, right? We're not willing to really change our habitual routines for the life that we want to live. It's an interesting paradigm to think about that because, again, we're seeing lifestyle changes really move the needle the most, and then medication-based changes. And again, you have to take that into consideration in terms of like the populations we're studying. Some of them were HIV positive populations with the intraretroviral like viral therapy. So again, you still have to take each into its own account. But I guess to directly answer your question, there was a paper also published out of the Buck Institute pretty recently looking at the therapeutic plasma exchange. And they looked at about 30 biological age clocks, including ones from True Diagnostic. And they saw like a 2.61 year reduction in the biological age clocks too. Again, probably not a huge surprise. Like we thought that, therapeutic plasma exchange, probably made a difference. It's a very popular procedure that is popping up in longevity clinics nowadays. But to have the data on that is super important because again, it's hard to move these metrics. Like it's not as easy as people think, right? So to see a multi-year age reversal, even within the TPE, I think really will push people to think or start to challenge, oh, I really do need to make changes to my lifestyle even to see a larger effect.
And you're right. That makes sense that if you're unhealthy, you're going to see the biggest gains from really implementing any of the lifestyle or medication or supplemental things. And if you're already pretty healthy, you're going to see less of an impact because you're already pretty healthy and your rate of aging, pace of aging is lower.
Yeah, definitely. I think another cool one, we just had a healthcare provider email us about this one the other day. We ran kind of an internal analysis too. It's like lithium supplementation. It's interesting. Yeah, I just had a podcast go out talking about this with Dr. Gabriel Freeze. And he's out of Texas and he studies suicidal behavior, other type of kind of neurocognitive issues happening in the brain, and like schizophrenia, even multi-personality disorder. And lithium usually helps with those type of disorders, but we also actually see the clocks rewind when you're taking lithium as well. Due to kind of affecting that molecular aging process within the cell itself. So that one will be interesting to study and follow up on.
That is an entire rabbit hole that I wanted to briefly go down with you. But lithium tends to be one of the minerals that's more prevalent in certain waters around the world that are often associated with longevity. It tends to be low dose lithium, and I like low dose lithium. I'm not sure if I'd want to use a higher dose of it for other reasons. But what are you seeing in terms of, I don't know if that study looked into low dose lithium at all, or if it was only like clinical dosages, higher dosages. And then also the rabbit hole is around the blue zones in general, what your thoughts are on those.
Yeah, it would be low dose lithium. Absolutely. So to answer that question there, the blue zones are so fun. They're so great. They're interesting to learn about. I think they create really awesome populations that we can study and look at. I think it's missing a bigger picture though. My hot take on it is there are also other areas in the world who are under extreme poverty, right? That aren't necessarily in a blue zone. So I'm thinking like there are particular areas or regions in Costa Rica where people tend to live like super, super long, but they're under extreme poverty and don't follow like the traditional blue zone, right? So it's like, why the difference, right? You don't have to live like blue zones. I would say, I'm not saying that they're, super well off by any means as well. But I'd like to just understand the difference, I think, between other populations that live really long too, right? And what's the connection there? Because the blue zone is just one example. My also other hot take is usually when people ask me that, they're like, oh, the blue zones, they drink a lot of wine, they eat a lot of carbs, they do all these things. Like, I can do those too. And I'm like, great. Well, you also work, 80 plus hours a week, right? You have not worked on your childhood trauma. You're stressed out all the time. You are, emotionally unavailable and you're chugging bottles of crappy wine and, eating a Domino's pizza. So I'm like, no, we're not the same as the blue zone diet or the blue zone, areas as well.
I like what you were saying that looking at the other longevity hotspots around the world outside of the blue zones, the ones where the data wasn't necessarily cherry picked to conform around a story.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
You mentioned trauma, and there's obviously the capital T traumas that are like the things that everyone would consider traumas. There's also the traumatic experiences that we all experience differently. Are you seeing any impact on biological aging from not just the capital T traumas, but the more minor events?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, childhood trauma has a huge effect on biological aging. There are a lot of association-based papers, even like, socioeconomic status at the childhood level, even at the neighborhood level, or at the childhood level within the family level and the neighborhood level. That's something we as children may have never known, right? That can even have effects on your biological aging too. So 100%. I think, yeah, that's a huge, more people are talking about it nowadays, which is great. Like I think a lot more people go to therapy. I think it's something that is like less taboo. I think, more people are talking about it openly on podcasts or even with their friends. It's more of like that mental health side of things, right? That can have, again, a huge outcome on outlook on your biological aging too. Even there's even studies like even the way we talk to ourselves, right? Whether you have an internal monologue or not. I think everyone has that to some extent. Not like the consistent internal monologue, but saying like if I hung up off after this podcast, I was like, oh my God, why did I say that? That was so awful. Like, should I message Nick to remove it? And like, if I just go about my day and I just think about that all weekend and I'm like beating myself up about it, like that's going to negatively affect my gene expression. But if I'm like, oh, I messed up, I learned from it. That's cool. No biggie. No one else has a microscope on me. They're not even going to notice it and just like brush it off and move on. That's going to have a positive effect on your epigenetic expression level. So it is really, yeah, crazy how, maybe these more like minuscule interactions or, things we don't consciously, right, do are going to have an effect on the aging process.
I think also having a very clear North Star or sense of direction, like where you're trying to go and like your reason for even wanting to live a long time with a great health span, that's going to be probably more impactful than some supplements that have been studied in cell cultures but never translated anywhere beyond that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think too. I think that's a great point to bring up.
Well, I have my last test results in front of me. I think it'd be fun to quickly go through these and see if you have any insights and what you would do if you were in my shoes to optimize these results.
Yeah, so this looks good. I know you mentioned you may have been a little bit sick at the time. So this is our omic M age. It looks like you're 8 years younger than your calendar age, which is crazy. That's a really, really good result. Most men age faster too, right? They're older biologically, they die younger compared to women. So this is really impressive. You're doing better than 92% of people of men at your same chronological age.
At least in August of 2022. So
right. You need to retest.
Yeah.
Because you said you were sick like the day after you took it or something like that, right?
The week before.
You may have not seen, the effect on this quite yet. But even your, systems age looks good. All of your ages.
I think we see it here under my blood. My blood was older than my chronological age.
Blood is a little bit higher. Yeah, that would mean, the blood is going to be made up of a lot of factors that you're measuring on like a CBC panel as well. Does anyone in your family, you don't have to say this out loud, but, that is most predictive of like particular like blood diseases and cancers, leukemia, particular outcomes too. Not saying like you're going to have any of those, but some people who do like have like you need to think about your whole health, family health, things like that as well. But you're barely older. You're like right at the halfway.
Yeah, well, there's no incidence of blood cancers and blood disorders as far as
good
I'm aware. Okay, and then the rest looks pretty normal within range. Pace of aging. Back when I interviewed Ryan, he mentioned this was 0.8 was pretty slow. But now these days I hear a 0.6 something. So I guess I'm no longer in the on the leaderboard.
Right. Yes. We'll have to get you on the leaderboard, get you retested and consented if you want to join. And then that's all that's on this report. So this report is solely focusing
Okay.
on the aging. So the omic MAH, the symphony age, and the Dunedin pace, which again looks great.
Okay.
This is just a different format. So, if you keep scrolling, we have your immune cell subset, we have that fitness age, and other things that we can
So
go
this
through.
right here, you can see my blood age was a year older than my blood age here is also a bit older. Immune system age is a bit older. That probably was related to being sick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
And for anyone listening in, I'll put a link to my report in the show notes so you can check it out if you're curious how this looks, and also a link to my follow up when I take it.
Yeah, so this is just going into you're on the report that's going into the individual systems. Yeah, the symphony age report. So you're getting your percentiles for each of the individual scores as well, which again look really, really good. This is probably like one of the best I've seen. I mean, you're in like 14th percentile, 24th percentile, 46 for kidney, hearts 25th.
46 is good.
46 is a little higher, but for like most part on average, right? You're doing like super, super well. Your kind of combined score of all of these together is that 23 of age.
Okay.
And then, this is where you can look into the systems and the related biomarkers and diseases which make up that particular system. So,
cool.
Which biomarkers are used in the training, which diseases is that individual age predictive of?
So these are mostly blood labs, it looks like.
Yes. Like if you go to musculoskeletal, keep scrolling down, that long list right there. Those are a lot of like functional based movements too. So you get a lot of good biomarkers and then more like functional based movements as well. So this was going to be, this is very large data out of some biobank cohorts. That's why biobanks are so important, because we are limited by what's in there, right? What we can actually go back and look at historically. So this is why biobanks are super, super important, is to create these predictors.
Okay, gotcha. And then is there another report?
Oh, we have a lot of reports. So we have like different versions of summary reports. Each report as an individual listed report as well. So just depending on exactly what you what you want to focus on, you can like dive deep into one of the reports. So if you're at the beginning of that symphony age report, you would have had a lot of introductory information just on that symphony age.
Yeah, I saw that and I skipped over it just now for the sake of the recording. But you mentioned VO2 max and other things you're able to predict from epigenetics. Is that a different report?
That should be on either the summary report or the physical fitness report in there.
What else do you see? Like, where do you see diagnostics in general going, and for True Diagnostic specifically?
Yeah, actually, we're going to launch a new product, pre-launch on November 4th. It's called our True Health Report, which actually is for people who really want to optimize just their general biomarkers, but with a focus, I would say, on like vitamins, antioxidants, nutritional based markers, mitochondrial health, oxidative stress, hormones, NAD metabolites, some really other cool outcomes as well. So that's where we use the epigenetic biomarker proxies. Again, just through the lens of epigenetics, we're able to report out all of these different things, tell you where you're deficient, and then recommend supplementation and treatment based off of that. So of course, if you're deficient in that area, in that case, a supplement would be helpful, right? Because you're optimizing your overall health for that particular deficiency, which in turn will lower your biological aging as well. We're also then going to be creating some new products, I would say, at the beginning of early next year, called methylation risk score products. So methylation risk scores are kind of the epigenetic version of a polygenic risk score. Again, as it relates to genetics, where that's unchangeable, it's not as helpful, but these methylation risk scores actually predict risk, and they're changeable too. So we'll have really unique, novel insights for depression, cardiovascular disease, and a couple others based off the methylation risk scores too.
Cool. Methylation is a hot topic right now. Why is methylation the focus and acetylation is like never brought up in these conversations?
The way you measure it, just you're able to measure it. Acetylation is really, really hard to measure, but histone acetylation in particular. But I guess you could call it, it's just nomenclature too, I believe, as well, just how it was named.
Hannah, what is your approach when you're looking at longevity interventions, whether it's follistatin gene therapy or it's a new molecule or any of these? How do you separate out what's going to potentially work well and what's just overhyped or potentially risky? Like, how do you think through the long term of these?
I like this question. Gosh, there has to be data around it, you guys. I mean, you would think that's like really simple. I know I know biohackers want to, try stuff on themselves, do like N of one precision based medicine and stuff, but then it's not a really well thought through N of one precision based medicine study and they're not doing the correct testing. Like there has to be data on it. There has to be even an N of one randomized controlled trial published in a peer reviewed journal. That's a high noteworthy journal as well. Like you can do that. Like there is that data available. There are some companies who are doing that too. Again, creating kind of these larger biobanks through institutional review boards or IRBs for people to submit kind of more of these N of one processes and what works and what doesn't. But again, there just has to be data around it. Like I think there's a lot of hype around a lot of, again, supplements, molecules, people claiming to reverse, biological ages by up to, 20, 30 years, which I'm telling you, it's just not possible. You need the actual data behind it. I think that's just so important. And if, there's not data to show, then I probably wouldn't believe the said thing, person, outcome you're looking for.
Okay. But Hannah, if people are listening in and they want the 80-20 of longevity protocols, they want the protocol that only takes 20% of the effort or resources, whatever it is, and it gets them the most possible outcome, whether it's molecules or lifestyle things, of course, it's going to be doing the basics right, like sleeping enough, moving enough, eating enough, breathing right, getting light exposure, all these types of things. What else would you include in that?
Well, like my head still goes straight to like caloric restriction because again, like you're saving money, you're like doing, you're saving time, you're skipping a meal, or you're putting less effort into it. I think a lot of the other things are hard though, like light therapy. You have to stand there, right, in front of the light. You have to like create time, which is really hard to do unless you have it in a really cool setup where you're doing other things alongside of it. Yeah, I mean, I think food optimization is super important too. Like if you're already like cooking a meal and things like that. I know that's still very, very simple, but right now, there's a lot of articles out there about how just depleted our food is of nutrition. So if you're able to, I think like go to the farmer's market or shop local or do something like that, that's just going to have like such a big return, not only on your own health, but like from an economical standpoint too. That'll be my answer.
Yeah, that's a good one. I'm a big fan of farmers markets for so many reasons, and like the produce that you get there is actually fresh, unlike what you get in the grocery store. Even if you're going to a high-end grocery store, from the time it was picked and harvested to arriving on your plate is shockingly long for some fruits and vegetables. Are there any dietary agnostic things that you like to, or I guess diet agnostic things you like to include in your list of foods, whether it's a drink, a substance, it's just something else like a class, maybe like fiber? Are you a fan of fiber or like olive oil, those types of things?
Yeah, olive oil. Gosh, I love olive oil just because of the way it tastes. Like I use it every single day. I think it's so good. So I'm a big fan of olive oil. I think like if you wanted to supplement, and just have like a good baseline, if like you're not doing testing or, like everyone's basically deficient in vitamin D. So you want some vitamin D, you don't want too much. It's not going to hurt you if you get too much, but you don't want to overdo it as well. You probably want a good magnesium supplementation. And then you probably want, I would say vitamin D, magnesium, and then I would say creatine, probably. Those three aren't going to hurt you. I think I'd also add a methylated B vitamin on top of it, but especially if you're, again, deficient and you need the testing in order to determine that.
That's interesting. So you choose creatine over something like essential amino acids?
I think so. Yeah, I think I would. I think creatine, again, I think a really big problem is people aren't going to the gym. They're not putting in the work. You still need to put in the work to really optimize, I would say, creatine. I mean, essential amino acids are super, super important. I think they're great. I think you should probably do that though, as well as like a good clean protein shake or something to increase protein too. But yeah, creatine is great for increasing muscle mass as well. And we lose that as we tend to age.
And you mentioned vitamin D, but what about the other fat-soluble vitamins that people are often deficient in, like A and E and K?
Yeah, I think vitamin D with A and K would be best. You're picking apart my answers. I love it.
Yeah, and then also on the mineral side, magnesium specifically, of course, it's the most deficient of the minerals, and it's also an electrolyte. But are you a fan of multiminerals?
I am. Yeah, I think it could be helpful. Again, I think there's limited research research out there that I'm just not aware of quite yet. So, if anyone has any, I'd be happy to take a look.
Yeah, I love to see research and how these different substances impact biological age. And then there's also the question of, are you just fixing a deficiency, or are you getting like even more and going to an optimal level? Like where is the benefit really coming from?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And then the polyphenol supplements, there's so many of them. They're all very, very popular in the longevity world. Do you like either any of those or just like natural sources of polyphenols?
Yeah, I think natural sources of polyphenols are great. Again, I think our reporting can tell you if you're deficient in those antioxidants, especially this new report that's coming out. But if you have if you have a shorter telomere length, if you have some EBPs that are out of range on our True Age report, I might recommend some type of antioxidant support, especially if you're just running really high on stress already. There's that antioxidant paradox where you could actually have too much, right, of the antioxidants, and we don't want that. So always getting them from food, I think, it's huge. I really like 5 to 10, quercetin. I think those are the best. You can get 5 to 10 through strawberries consumption. They're the food that has the most 5 to 10. So hopefully you like strawberries.
What was that acronym? I've heard you say it a couple of times now. EBP?
Epigenetic biomarker proxy. So other things we're able to predict through epigenetics, like the clinical lab values or metabolites or proteins.
Well, Hannah, this has been a blast. If people want to connect with you, follow you on your platforms, or try the True Diagnostic tests, how do they go about that?
Feel free to follow us, look us up, TruDiagnostic.com, True Diagnostic in some way, shape, or form on social. I have my everythingepigenetics.com, everything epigenetics on Instagram as well. But yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to email me at Hannah, HANN at TruDiagnostic.com.
Perfect. And you guys set up my listeners with the code URBAN to save them on their test if they decide to get started too. A couple more questions for you before we sign off today. If there was a worldwide burning of the books and all knowledge is lost, what resources, what teachers would you save and why?
Yeah, I'm in the mood, obviously focused super highly on epigenetics right now. Probably Dr. Morgan Levine. I would save her because she's just like the best epigenetic researcher out there. I think she's made like super big strides in these space.
What's one thing the Everything Epigenetics and the True Diagnostic tribes don't know about you?
I love to read fiction books too. So that's maybe something that's different that not a lot of people know.
Okay. All right, Hannah. If people made it this far, are there any parting words of wisdom you'd like to leave them with?
Oh, if you're interested in testing, just do it. I think, you can always do a baseline. You have to start somewhere. You're never too young. You're never too old to start testing. So yeah, if you even have an inkling, use Nick's code. I think it's a pretty good deal for you all. And then see where you're at and see if you want to start to make some serious changes in your life. And then you can always decide if you want to retest later on as well. But if you do, we have a cool subscription plan as well that saves you a lot of money.
Yeah, and this is one of those tests where it's actually actionable. You can go in, you can make changes, you can retest, and you can hopefully see an improvement, as I will find out shortly when I take my retest.
Yeah, absolutely. We recommend the retest, every 6 to 12 months. We talked about it a little bit more. The subscription, if we'll ship you one every 3 months, I believe. So it's really good for people who are just wanting to start out and get some real-time feedback.
Awesome. Well, Hannah, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Nick.
I hope that this has been helpful for you. If you enjoyed it, subscribe and hit the thumbs up. I love knowing who's in the 1% committed to reaching their full potential. Comment 1% below so that I know who you are. For all the resources and links, meet me on my website at mindbodypeak.com. I appreciate you and look forward to connecting with you. As a reminder, the information depicted in this video is for information purposes only. Please consult your primary healthcare professional before making any lifestyle changes.